about to learn the history of the oldest home in Daytona Beach. Lillian Place has been through many incarnations, but its history can only be told through the eyes of those who lived there. Your host for this journey is Pat Thompson Bennett, the granddaughter of Lawrence Thompson, the builder of Lillian Place and a founding father of Daytona Beach.
My name is Patricia Thompson Bennett, B-E-N-N-E-T-T. I guess you could spell Thompson. My grandfather's name was Lawrence Thompson, and my father's name was Lawrence Thompson, L-A-U-R-E-N-C-E. And actually, I never knew my grandparents. They died before I was born, but I had a lot to do with them since I lived in the house that they had built. And I felt like I knew them because it was all their things. Well, this is something that's always intrigued me. Matthias Day brought these people down from Cincinnati, Ohio in 1875. And that's when my father was born. He was 6 months old when they came down here. And they called him, I read somewhere, they called him the Pied Piper of Cincinnati. He got all these people to come to this wilderness. Cincinnati was a prosperous town, and I never understood why they came to. Florida was terrible in those days. Mosquitoes, heat, the long clothes they wore, heavy clothes. I don't know how he convinced all these people to come, but he did. He bought two different groups, and he bought land. Land, I guess it was the land was so cheap. They could buy land for practically nothing, and orange trees. But he went broke. He bought some land and went bankrupt and went back to Cincinnati. But he left all these people here, including my grandparents. And there were, I think, about 16 people here when my grandparents came. Very few. But anyway, it's amazing that they came, and I'm so glad they did.
In 1870, a group of colonists led by Matthias Day came from Mansfield, Ohio, and purchased 2,144 acres along the Halifax River, about 12 miles north of the inlet. It was the abandoned Williams Plantation, and he decided to create his development here. Day also mapped out Ridgewood Avenue, also known as US 1, and planned a community house, which became known as the Palmetto House, where settlers could stay until they built their own homes. Day originally named the development Tomoka, but by 1872 the earliest settlers had chosen the name of the community, Daytona. On one of Day's many trips down from Ohio to bring prospective buyers, in 1874 he brought a man named Lawrence Thompson. After seeing Daytona, Thompson returned home to Cincinnati and brought his family down the next year, 1875.
Lillian Place was built by my grandparents. They lived across the river. All the first old-timers here lived on the Beach Street side, on Beach Street. They had a house there. My grandfather had a general store. Looked like a little house on the prairie, but anyway, it was there. What they called a dry goods store. I don't know what that is, but...
Lawrence Thompson, his wife Mary Elijah Coffin Thompson, their young daughter Lillian, and their 2-month-old Lawrence arrived in Daytona and built their first home on South Beach Street. Lawrence Thompson owned and operated a general store right next to their home, the Thompson Brothers. Mr. Thompson was an active participant in the organization and incorporation of Daytona Beach, July 26, 1876. He was the first clerk of Daytona, and he was also the first signer of the petition to grant municipal suffrage for women. It was probably the first movement towards women's suffrage in the state of Florida.
And then this is another mystery to me. For some reason, my grandparents decided to go across the river. There were no bridges, by the way. They went across the river and built Lillian Place on the peninsula, which was remarkable because there were no bridges, nobody living over there. There are a lot of mysteries to me, why they did these things. But that was the only house on the peninsula. And my father grew up there, and he was always talking about how he had to row across the river to school. There was only one school on the mainland, Miss Cross's public school. By the way, I still have the clock, Miss Cross's clock. But he always said he had to row across the river or sail across. And when we complained about going to school, he said, "Oh, you have it easy. I had to row across the river or sail." Well, we thought that would be fun, but anyway, it's a mystery to me why they built that there. And the amazing part to me is it was considered kind of a mansion. It was huge. They used this Victorian style. if you know what that is, with the cupolas and the Widow's Walk, and copied after. The Widow's Walk always amused me. That was a Victorian or New England idea. The widows would stand on the balcony there looking out to see their wailing husbands come in. Well, you look out on the Halifax, you don't see anything, but anyway, that was part of the style. And it was very, very elaborate.
In 1886, Mr. Thompson bought the north side of what is now Silver Beach Avenue from the river to the ocean and built his home on the river. There were no bridges on the peninsula at the time, so all supplies were brought over by boat. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson lived in their new home with their now 3 children, Lillian, Lawrence, and Harry, who was born in Daytona in 1883. During the early years in their home, Mr. Thompson gave up the dry goods business and established the Equitable Building and Loan Company, which helped many Daytona people to get their start in acquiring properties in their new town. He also established the first real estate and insurance businesses in Daytona. Lawrence Thompson was a very large part of building and developing Daytona. He offered land and riparian rights to the Halifax Yacht Club so it could be built and was a founding member. He also gave the land next to his property so that the South Beach Bridge could be built. Mrs. Thompson assisted her husband in his businesses and was a leader in the social and church circles. She was a charter member of the Palmetto Club and helping in its Children of Working Negro Women. This connected her family with Mary Bethune-Cookman.
My grandmother, who was named Mary Eliza Thompson, had a lot of connections with Bethune-Cookman College. In fact, my father was on the board of Bethune-Cookman when I grew up, but my grandmother was very instrumental in helping the blacks in Daytona. She had started a kindergarten here for them. I never knew my grandparents, but I read something about her funeral. At her funeral, Mrs. Bethune came and read a little eulogy. So she was very connected to Bethune-Cookman.
Mary McLeod Bethune was an American educator and civil rights leader, best known for starting a school for African American students in Daytona Beach, which later became Bethune-Cookman University. Miss Bethune was also known as an advisor to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1904, she rented a small house for $11 a month, making benches and desks out of discarded crates. That same year, Bethune used $1.50 to start the Literacy and Industrial Training School for Negro girls in Daytona. The school began with 6 students, 5 girls ages 6 through 12, and her son Albert. Through Dr. Bethune's lifetime, the school underwent several stages of growth and development, and by 2004, Bethune-Cookman University celebrated its 100-year anniversary. It currently sits on 82 acres in Daytona Beach. There are now 40 buildings that educate more than 3,000 students.
Stephen Crane stayed there. He was shipwrecked off the coast of Daytona in the open boat. In the Commodore, and he came ashore in the open boat, the story he wrote, in 1897. And my grandparents took him in. I guess there weren't very many people around here, and they were lucky enough to take him. And he spent the night with them. And we were always looking he gave them a copy of the Red Badge of Courage that was so famous, an autographed copy, and we always looked for it. We never found it. They probably just gave it away. Who was that writer? It didn't mean anything to them.
The 25-year-old writer gained international fame with the publication of his novel, The Red Badge of Courage, in 1896. After the book's success, he was sent to Cuba to cover the insurrection against Spain. After the boat he was traveling on, the Commodore, sank, Crane and 4 of his shipmates spent a day on a 10-foot lifeboat before they reached Daytona Beach. Crane was found on the shores of Daytona not far from Lilianplace. He was brought to Lilianplace and welcomed in and cared for. He spent some time recuperating there, and it is there that he got the backdrop for his story, The Open Boat. Crane published an account in a New York newspaper 5 days later, and The Open Boat was published in Scribner's Magazine the following June.
We first rented a house, and I was married. My husband was from New Jersey, and we were renting a house, and he said, "Why don't we move into Lilianplace? You own it." She had given it to me before this. I was going to Columbia University, and she wrote me a letter saying, "I'm giving you Lilianplace." And I said, "Oh, who wants that?" But anyway, he said, "Why don't we move in there?" And we did. There was an apartment made into Lilianplace on the southeast side. And I didn't make it, but I think my grandparents rented it to some people. But it's interesting, that apartment, because that's where Lucille the ghost lives. And everybody that's ever lived in that apartment, and I never told them about it, they all saw or felt or heard something there. So there's something there. I made up who Lucille the ghost was. This is a book I wrote about. In fact, she tells the story. But the reason I know her name is Lucille, I had one of the tenants in there, and she came downstairs and she said, "Pat, do you ever any ancestors named Lucille?" And I said, "Not that I know of." She said, "Well, I woke up in the middle of the night and this friendly, smiling face said, 'Don't be afraid. My name is Lucille.'" And that's where we got the name from. Now, I don't know who she was. In this book, I made up all about who she was, but she's there because everybody saw her. She had a strange habit of pouring water. We never realized what that was all about. But she was a friendly ghost. She would play tricks on people and put the vacuum cleaner on in the middle of the night and do strange things. Locked my daughter in the bathroom once. I mean, she was kind of a friendly, mischievous ghost. I don't know what her purpose was. She just didn't want to leave, I guess, for some reason. The reason I'm so attached to it, by the way, is not only did I live there, when I was young, very young, I lived on the Silver Beach Avenue, and my cousin Broody, who was my cousin, we were raised like brother and sister, and his mother left. They got a divorce, which was unheard of in those days. And so Aunt Lil took care of him. He was about 5 or 6 years old when he went there. And I played with him every day. So we played up and down in the yard at Lilianplace all the time. I knew it, like, very well, backwards and forwards. There was this tree we used to climb, and there were guava trees and a grapefruit tree. And a lot of children loved Lilianplace. My children's friends loved to come there and spend the night because it was so spooky. They always thought they might see the ghost. And we used to give Halloween parties, and we didn't even have to decorate. It was already scary enough. But the funny thing was, on Halloween, in the beginning, no children ever came there trick-or-treating. They were afraid. They were afraid to knock on the door. But it was the perfect place for ghost stories and parties and Halloween, that kind of thing. And I always liked that. I used to make a big thing of it.
Yes, I am Linda Karen Lentz Hubert.
Okay, and can you tell me how you're related to the Thompson family?
I am the great-granddaughter of Lawrence Thompson, who built this house, and the granddaughter of Lawrence Thompson, who lived several houses on the corner down, but who grew up here. And my mother was one of his 3 daughters.
Could you tell me a little bit about your grandfather?
Well, my grandfather, he died in his 60s, and so I guess of the grandchildren, Barbara, my cousin, is a couple of months younger, and I were the only ones who really knew him. He had a stroke and then died, but he lived a really remarkable life. He was late marrying. My grandmother, who came from Maryland, from St. Mary's County, she was Elsie Chesley Blackston. Her passion for my grandfather extended over quite some years while he went to Cuba, and he was involved in legal activities in Cuba. I think that he was quite a success financially. He did pretty well once he decided to settle down and marry my grandmother, and they were living here. She came from Maryland, as I said, and came back here and lived with him. And they enjoyed kind of a family compound, which only got extended as the generations grew. As my 2 aunts, one of them came to live here, Aunt Pat, and my other Aunt Liza lived in the other house that's the house that the group would like to acquire, which is 2 houses up on the river, or just up on the other side of the condominiums they both lived in when they died. Now all of that generation's gone, and we're the oldest generation.
Could you tell me a little bit about your Aunt Pat?
Oh, well, she was wonderful. We always thought of her as ours, as children. She wasn't really an adult. She was 16 years older than I, and in college by the time I was sort of talking and walking and all of that. And she taught me all her dirty college songs when I was tiny, and I still can remember all those. And the alphabet backwards, which was one of our shared skills, which of course, unless you want to spend your life filing, is an okay skill to have. If you do file, you're screwed. But she loved to tell stories, and she had a fabulous imagination, and she grew up in a time that was pretty colorful in this country. She was in college during the First World War when there was a lot of mail deprivation, but I don't think she suffered. And she would come home from college and tell us stories, and then when she went off to Columbia and came back, she was married then, and she and her husband both were storytellers. And the main thing that she represented for my cousins and me was the fact that she was Muggs Maloney, the leader of the gang. And we had two gangs, her good bad gang and the gang that was headed by my father, who was Babyface Nelson. And all the other adults in the family were part of that gang, and we were constantly in some sort of competition and conflict. And I don't know how we were construing this as kids, because it was all very subversive, I'm sure, with us being part of criminal activity. But the stories were really, really good, and they were continuing stories. So when I'd come back to Florida with my brother and ultimately two brothers, we would beg her to tell stories, and all the cousins would collect on the screen porch right there, and we would listen just raptly to Pat tell these tales. She wasn't really an aunt even. She was just one of us, only of course better and skilled and outrageous, and she was always on your side. She was never on your mother's side. It was always dependable that she would be on your side.
And could you tell me what your memories are of Lillian Place?
Well, she always lived here, and so my memories involve the various configurations of the rooms. They would change as Pat encountered different parts of her life. For a while there were tenants up above here, and that's of course where the ghost stories emanated from, and my cousin Barbara and I contributed to that in a way. We were up there painting. I think we were 12, and we were painting that apartment, and we heard water running, or so we claimed, and we got ourselves quite hysterical, and we came down and said, "There's noises up there," and so on and so on. And she said, "That's Lucille, that's just Lucille." And so we got fed into that continuum of tales that various tenants apparently added to over the years. And Lucille, I don't know about Lucille, but she's grown in stature over the last, I guess, 15 years, as Pat put her in books and people started hearing a lot about her. And some people are scared of this house because they hear about its ghosts. But I think they're very benign ghosts. If they're here, they're sweet and nice and friendly. Oh, I don't have any bad memories of this house. No, Pat was so accommodating. She had everybody, and all her kids' friends came in and out of here. And the only thing I guess about it, there were a lot of bugs and stuff like that, like old houses have. You just had to sort of put up with that. But apart from that, and they never bothered me. No, I like the Spanish moss dripping down.
And I always liked that. I used to make
creepy, spooky stuff.
Daytona in my day was a millionaire's place. They came here in the winter. All the wealthy people came just for a few months in the winter, and they all lived along the river, just where we lived. My mother used to say we were on Millionaire's Row, the wrong end, but they were all older people that came here just for a few months in the summer. The Coca-Cola people, the gamblers. It was a different kind of clientele in those days. And most of the time, those houses were vacant. The house next door to me. We'd play in the yard, but there was nobody in these houses most of the time.
Daytona's wide beach of smooth, compacted sand attracted automobile and motorcycle races beginning in 1902. As pioneers of the industry tested their inventions, Daytona Beach became widely known in the early 1900s for high-speed automobile testing and later racing. This made the beach a mecca for automobile enthusiasts. But aside from that, it also became the playground for many of the rich who wanted to escape the harsh winters of the North. Lawrence Thompson had some wealthy and influential neighbors. Along Beach Street was the mansion of Charles Burgoyne. In 1896, Mr. Burgoyne built his bride an enormous home, promptly dubbed the Castle by locals who had never seen anything like it. Burgoyne also built the first community center and organized concerts along the river and promoted the town's events to travelers. He is thought of as the man who brought tourism to Daytona Beach. Another neighbor, although living on the mainland, Deleuze Blodgett, a wealthy timber baron from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He built his home in 1896. It was a grand residence whose visitors included suffragist Susan B. Anthony. It was an interesting home, a place with tall sliding doors that disappeared into walls and fireplaces. On the right side of Lillian Place is Hotchkiss House, the home of Eli Hotchkiss, who could be seen here on the right, an industrialist who invented the office stapler. It was built in 1905 with a 6-sided 3-story turret and a porch where he could watch the sunsets on the Halifax. His home was built by Lawrence Thompson, the builder of Lillian Place. Thompson sold Hotchkiss the house as a winter home. The Japanese word for stapler, hachikisu, comes from the Hotchkiss stapler. Preservationists are working to save this more than century-old home right now. To the left and across the road from Lillian Place stood the Gamble Mansion. The mansion was built by James Gamble, ivory soap maker and creator of Procter & Gamble. Gamble built his mansion in 1898. The home was destroyed many years later, but the guest house still stands on Peninsula Boulevard. It is now known as August 7 Inn and has been carefully restored and listed on the National Historic Registry. Just north and up the river a few miles in Ormond Beach, oil industry multimillionaire John D. Rockefeller built his winter home, the Casements. It was built in 1910. Rockefeller was a very popular resident in the area, a philanthropist and an avid golfer. The Casements was visited by such luminaries as the Prince of Wales, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, Thomas Edison, and Will Rogers. It is now a historical museum and riverfront park. Rockefeller only built the Casements after spending several winters at the Ormond Beach Hotel on the river. The hotel was built in 1891 and owned by Henry Flagler. For many years, the hotel was known as the Millionaire's Colony, a popular resort for wealthy visitors. Lillian Graham Thompson, seen here on the right, attended Daytona Institute, then the Hollister, Massachusetts High School, and for 2 years the New England Conservatory of Music. She assisted her father in the Equitable Building and Loan Office, joined the family firm in 1920. She carried on the Negro kindergarten work in her mother's place, was in church work and social activities. She lived in the family home until her death, February 10, 1934. Patricia Thompson Bennett lived in Lillian Place until it was sold in 1984 and passed away in 2011.
Oh, I thank God, it's wonderful. I mean, I just thought at one time they might just tear it down like Daytona does every other old structure. And I was so grateful. And Nancy Long did a lot to help preserve it. And we made it so important. Everybody knows about Lillian Place and Lucille the Ghost. And it's not going to be torn down. And I'm just thankful. I think it's the best thing that ever happened. The fact that it's the oldest house here and everybody knows where it is. I never go anywhere that I don't say I lived in Lillian Place. Oh, Lillian Place. We've made it, we've given it enough publicity to save it. And that's the best part.
In December of 2009, the Heritage Preservation Trust of Volusia County decided to save an important piece of Volusia County history. This 127-year-old home is the oldest home on the beach side. This 3-story building is an excellent example of Italianate high Victorian architecture and is one of only 2 such structures still remaining in the county. Thanks to the generosity of people like you, plans are underway to restore Lillian Place to its original 1884 grandeur. The Trust was able to acquire this significant site through the Volusia County Eco Grant. Lillian Place, neglected for years, will be renovated with supervision provided by the Trust and open to the public as a museum and public meeting place. Speakers, films, and historical figure reenactors can provide interesting programs about local heritage. Period furniture and artifacts will bring history alive for our visitors. Thanks to the work of Nancy Long, the Heritage Preservation Trust, and volunteers, Lillian Place will be around for many years to come and for all to enjoy.